Welcome, everybody, to the first session of the Federalist Papers. I like to give myself challenges. I got my green card 2 days ago, so I was like, let's read the Federalist Papers. I want to know what I'm signing up for. We've done a lot of, so one of the theses that I have on Interact, where you now have the upside or downside of like sitting at a salon hosted by the founder and CEO, which I'm sure is like a different experience. One of my kind of gripes with reading culture today is that we just get super used to the great books, whether those are founding texts of political movements or political change, or they are the great classics of literature or philosophy. And sometimes we're just like, oh, I don't actually have to read it, or I don't have to read it as an adult. I touched upon it in school when I was 12, and clearly my worldview was super developed and my understanding very deep. I'll just henceforth be relying on other people's interpretation of these texts and like hope for the best. And I don't really agree with this. I think nobody's smarter than you. The world is run by people like us. So I'm going to mute you, DJ, because you're on the phone, but you can come back later. And I always urge people to go and read the primary text. Like, unless it's like, at a technical level that for whatever reason you cannot reach, which might be even different now because of AI. Like, you can ask an LLM to like explain to you like you're five because you are five maybe about that particular issue. Or it's, in a different language that you don't understand. Everything else you should be able to read. And I always try to, do what I preach. And I also go back and read some of these primary texts. And we have had incredible reading groups and interact by other hosts. So we did Tocqueville, we did Karl Popper, and we go back to, at least at my salons, and not to mention the great works of literature and philosophy, because I think these texts are not above any of us. Like, they are built and written and produced for people like us. And you will be a more autonomous participant in the world and freer and also kind of safer from other people trying to sell you things that are not true, right? If you haven't read, I don't know, Karl Marx or Hegel or whatever, anybody can come and create a very convincing TikTok video for you where like, blah, 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 this is what Nietzsche said. If you have read it, then you can be like, hang on a second. And I think that's important in navigating, a world where so many people are incentivized to gain more followers and views by sounding very convincing about these things. So we're flying into the Death Star here. I want to do a little bit of an intro at the beginning, and I welcome you to use the Zoom chat and introduce yourself, where you're calling in from, but also to allow a few of you to just jump in the video and introduce yourselves in like on camera. I'm more so curious like what your background is with these texts to understand like who here might have read it before or some of it. Or maybe you have an even more serious relationship with this text and you're here to rediscover or rediscuss it, versus the people who, like myself, are complete newbies. I've seen Hamilton and have seen a $10 bill. That's kind of and I'm aware of the Constitution. I have it here, but kind of that's all I know about it. And I'm a fresh reader. So yeah, this was my introduction. Anybody else wants to go and just grab the mic and jump in?
Sure, I will. Yeah, so I'm calling in from Bahamas. I'm here for work, but I'm a U.S. citizen. But this is my introduction to the Federalist Papers. Like, I'm aware of them, you know, in the culture, but I've not read them personally. So I'm excited to, go through these in depth with everyone.
Amazing, welcome. And Bahamas, we don't want to hear about that, okay? Good for you. Jose, do you want to go? Sorry to put you on the spot. I'm just so happy to see you again.
That's okay. You can hear me okay?
You're a teacher, so maybe you have a lot of experience with these stocks.
First I'm in summer, so that's exciting. But the other thing is I saw that you became permanent resident. Congratulations. And having gone through that process myself, and then having to decide where do I want my children to live, I really just wanted to hear your opinions about it and hear what people had to say. I've taught it as a high school teacher many years ago, and it was fun to reread it. I'm from California.
Yeah, this is like the kind of source code of a giant country. And it's so beautiful. And I think this is what I love about America. It's so empowering to know that you can, explore the geography, try to follow the crazy news every day. And it seems so complex. And obviously there are these like hundreds of millions of people doing their lives and there's this output, et cetera, et cetera. Nobody agrees on anything as it should be. And then you learn that actually, like these things come from very simple ideas, and like literal guys sat down with their like quill in a very primitive circumstances compared to ours, and kind of debated it out. And I find that so humbling, and so like it fills me with ambition in some sense that these things are kind of possible. And I know when like not everybody gets the crazy benefit of being there at the birth of a nation, and maybe in our lifetimes we will face different levels of responsibility. But why would, debating out how your school district should be run should be a smaller importance in your life? Or how your workplace should operate? Or, maybe a bigger question that you write the viral Substack essay about of how healthcare should go in this country, or the financing of the arts. And these guys were kind of like, they tweeted these. I thought when I was reading them, like these would be tweets today. And I really, really love them.
This would be a Substack.
Absolutely. Anyone else? Any newbies? Complete newbies?
I'm new, so I'll jump in. This is my first
Yeah.
one. My
Hi.
name's Max. Hey, I'm
Right in
calling
the
in
deep
from
water. You're not
yeah, deep
starting
water,
with
I
like
guess I
a
guess
poem.
so.
Love it.
I'm in Oakland. I guess my experience with the Federalist Papers is college, so it's been 20 years, and I'm excited to come back to it with other people that to talk to, not read them on my own. So yeah, excited.
I guess during a salon, you can a little bit read it for the literature, right? Like that this is writing, and you get the space to kind of let it breathe, which is really not something you usually get in college, where you have to read a lot of, like, you have to do a lot of extractive reading. We were doing Tocqueville, and it was so beautiful. And then we did a last like special after the whole book was read online. We did an offline special in New York with Mark Lilla, who is a historian at Columbia and teaches Tocqueville. He's been teaching it for decades. And the first thing I said to him, and then I felt like such a dummy, I was like, oh my God, this is so beautiful, as a text. And he looked at me and he was like, nobody ever says that at Columbia when they are reading it. And not because it's not beautiful to them, but it's just like not the priority. But I think for the writers, it's the priority. Even, I don't know, Charles Darwin or Richard Feynman were stylists. They were producing texts not for literary purposes, but they had very high standards for themselves, or at least very dutiful wives who would like transcribe and remove the adjectives or something. And what I love about these salons is usually readers get a chance to just reflect on the text themselves and the vibe.
Yeah, I can also introduce myself. I'm Alexa. I've been to one or two salons before, and I'm vaguely familiar with the texts. I'm a native New Yorker, and I went over them in grade school, but other than that, no familiarity.
That's very brave. It's very hard to go back to a text that you read at that age, right? Because it's like simultaneously, you both read it and you haven't read it. And that's kind of uncanny valley, can be very bizarre, especially with like literature, but I do think that with nonfiction as well. So well done you. Let's see how it feels now and whether you will have any like memory break-ins from grade school.
I'll also go. Hi, I'm James. As you can tell from the accent, Britain, New York. So no exposure to the Federalist Papers growing up beyond, Hamilton, and hearing about them through that.
Everybody remembers it like the thing that leads to Hamilton's affair.
Yeah, exactly.
Because it's like writing so hard. He has to like destroy his marriage and his finances right away.
Yeah, I mean, I always brought like looking at that kind of built them up to be this,
Yeah.
they're like really long essays, each one like a book length or something, and opened it up this afternoon and was like, oh, this is, a Substack post, kind of thing. And so was impressed by kind of how digestible it is, even 300 years, 250 years later. A little bit of using ChatGPT afterwards, just be like, did I understand that correctly? But yeah, excited to kind of learn more.
Thank you so much. And it's so interesting. And I was reflecting on how much they were debating whether to actually unite these independent states, right? Because the kind of intuitive thing when you're on the ground, I would imagine, and the anti-federalist papers were arguing for this case, is that, merging them all together would lead to tyranny. And this today actually is a very valid standpoint. Like Niall Ferguson's entire book, Civilization, is about how, the decentralization of Europe, where all these warring states were trying to outcompete each other, directly led to the geographical expansion because they had to go and find new places to plunder, basically, that it led to technological and scientific advancement and social reform because the Germans hated the French and the French hated the Spanish, et cetera, et cetera. And he compares it with China, which at the same time, for a while it was as advanced and prosperous as Europe. And then they had a war that the emperor decided that, okay, all geographical expansion stops, and they burned the fleet. But here it is the counterintuitive thing that ends up winning. Right? Because Madison argues that no, it's actually the small little democracies. We will have far fewer ideas, and this kind of gravitational force where one idea sucks in all the others and kind of takes over is much more likely. It's a funny thing that the US kind of ended up with a bipartisan situation, and it seems to be pretty stable. But still, this idea that the bigger, the freer is completely counterintuitive. I mean, even today, think about how many, I'm Eastern European, and how many times I heard people talking about Russia, which from my point of view is in Asia, right? But they think they are Europeans. And they always say oh, they have a Putin, because they need a Tsar because it's so big, right? It's ungovernable. And so you have to have a. But then you're okay, that's one factor. And then you have all these other geographical, cultural, et cetera, things that will play. But how hard it is to know in the moment, right? That's what I was learning from this part from Madison. How did he know? It's basically completely first principles thinking and saying, you know what? Actually, if I think through this myself in my head, it seems like we will be freer if we allow these decentralized entities to do their thing. But when it comes to governance and taxation and war, we have a union where we can call upon them and defend that it will lead to further protections for private property, etc. It was very counterintuitive. David Ballard is here. Hi.
Hi.
The economist in residence at Interns Excellence.
I'm David. I'm outside of Philadelphia, appropriately enough for this session.
The right place for this.
And I've been involved with Internet Intellect for a long time. Very happy to have been. I just got out of a board of trustees meeting for my local library, and I'm also an elected official locally. So I have some familiarity with factions and the kind of intrigue that Madison was talking about. And so I'm interested in this series. And also, I want to think about it in terms of, and this kind of goes to something that Alan was just saying, the Americans' recent experience with the Articles of Confederation, which had not worked at all as a organizing document or approach for the 13 colonies. So I think a lot of the things that Madison is saying about factions and about disputes and public quarrelsomeness stems in part from the experience with the Articles of Confederation and how they didn't really address the kind of federal needs that the Federalist Papers are trying to articulate. So I want to try to think about what we're doing with that sort of in the back of my mind as well. Yeah. And I'm on a busy street, so I'll get off now.
it's always personal. Like every theoretical text is written against or about one specific person. Always remember this, including these things, right? And if you read about number 10, there were these specific like creditor default cases where these factions arose. And even though they don't mention them, the contemporary reader, which was a group of about 1,000 people, right, knew exactly what they were talking about. And it's so interesting how, we look back at the greats and think like, oh, they were high in theory. No, it was the same thing. It was petty politics, competition. Everybody had a gripe with everybody else. And that's kind of good because you can extrapolate from individual cases and build pretty good rules. So I would like
Yeah,
to.
there's usually a story behind every high-flying idea.
Absolutely. I always say that all good writing is revenge. Every memoir is about one's mother. I want to read up a little passage. I think it's not about Madison's mother, but maybe we will change our minds during the conversation and then just open the floor and have you jump in. I'm really curious, first of all, as a reflection to this paragraph, how timely you feel the text was. Because I think we all, everybody who comes to this particular conversation from all the events that are on InterInsights platform, clearly there is a curiosity about contemporary politics, I would assume. And so I'm so curious whether you use that lens when reading these pages. So this is at the beginning. I was just like laughing my head off when I read this in a very respectful and, reverent way. Complaints are everywhere heard from our most considerate and virtuous citizens, equally the friends of public and private faith and of public and personal liberty, that our governments are too unstable, that the public good is disregarded in the conflicts of rival parties, and the measures are too often decided not according to the rules of justice and the rights of the minor party, but by the superior force of an interested and overbearing majority.
Yeah, I'll jump in with something like in that thread that kept like sticking out to me throughout this was like majority comes across as like derogatory, right? They're like, oh, like when we give too many people like what they want, we're obviously like um overbearing on the people who didn't want that thing, which like at first glance it feels like democracy is, yes, like we vote and the majority get what they want because that's the best way that we can figure things out. But like there's little bits and pieces right here about like virtue and morals and like recognizing that even when you're in the majority, like you have to take into account the minority or else you are going to fall into these like vicious factions and um infighting and you'll dissolve the union. So yeah, I don't know, as someone who like grows up in a democracy, it's like, yes, the majority is a good thing, but throughout this, like it comes across as a really negative aspect of like how people group together.
It's very counterintuitive, and the next session will be about the checks and balances paper. So this is a question for everyone, and I think Marcus, like you really like pointed out something very important here. Like, what is the greatest inherent built-in danger of hi baby greatest danger of a democracy? Like, what is something that it kind of carries in it that we always have to be mindful of?
I mean, just straight up tyranny of the majority, right? It's most common in like ethnic disputes, but just the masses can be aroused easily, often with false information, and that can lead to really dumb laws and oppression.
And do you remember how Tocqueville thinks about it? I remember, yeah, there's a whole like tyranny of the majority section about it. I recommend revisiting. Yeah, I mean, I remember, I think I shared this at the Tocqueville group, and sorry for getting autobiographical, but I remember when I was 16 and we were driving somewhere in Austria with my dad. I think we were skiing. And the BBC radio was on in English, and they were just announcing the landslide victory of Jörg Haider, who was a kind of Nazi-ish prime minister of Austria. This was the year 2000. And I remember I was completely aghast. I was like, I grew up in a Holocaust surviving family. Everybody's like super liberal, democracy, democracy. And I asked my dad, like, how is this possible? Like, how can people democratically elect somebody who denounces democracy? And I remember just saying this sentence and kind of I answered my own question. And it's so interesting. And, how many times, even in a small, you go camping with your friends and you can choose between like some amazing artisanal food place or In-N-Out, or I don't know. And people are dumb enough to want to go to the French place instead of going the super good In-N-Out. And you're like, okay, well, I guess we all voted wrong. But you signed up for this to be a vote, so there is no backing out. And it seems like if you look at basically any like self-described democracy around the world, any tradition that there may be, one of the core kind of mental gymnastics that their founding documents and their codices are trying to establish is how to avoid this or what to do when this happens. And many people who always In-N-Out, yeah. Anybody who goes to the French place, I'm like, what? Are you in France? Like, why do you go there? Anyway, sorry, I'm a new immigrant, so I'm super excited about In-N-Out burgers and animal-style fries. And so trying to figure out what to do and how to avoid this is, the core immune system of these places. And it's so interesting, and it will come back and back and back again during many of these papers. And some of these we will read as well during the 5 sessions, like how to avoid basically giving people power to choose and them choosing very dumbly not to have a choice. And sometimes this happens. Sometimes this happens.
So I was just maybe not on those exact points, but reading the Federalist Papers, it was the first time for me, and I am in Canada, so I'm more familiar with our system and our constitution and all that than the American one. But I think I think I agree with the general principle of, do we stop factions by taking away people's liberty, or do we just let people keep their liberty and then try to minimize or mitigate the effects of that choice? And I think I agree with that broad principle. People should have their liberty, even to make dumb decisions sometimes or whatever. But at the same time, I think they got the details very wrong in a lot of different ways. So even though I agree with that big principle, I don't agree with a lot of sort of, I don't think they, maybe for their particular local situation, they correctly recognized the threat or whatever, but they didn't for the long term. And I don't think they set things up properly. I know I'm saying this to a bunch of Americans who are like, oh my goodness, the founding founders are so amazing or whatever. But it's also interesting to me to see how Canada has grappled with some of these same issues and tried to solve them in different ways to varying levels of success. Okay. So, Terrence, I see that, but I'm talking to these people right now. Yes, I see you have the cord in your toe socks. Okay. I'll just give some examples that came to mind. In the United States, you have super PACs. You didn't always, this is a relatively new thing, but in Canada, campaign finance is very strictly controlled. You're allowed to make maximum $1,500 donation to a local riding and $1,500 to the National Society, and that's it. You don't get more. So that was sort of like a measure to try to take some of the influence of money out of politics. It works some, but not all the way. There's people with money are still very influential, but you don't have to do the same type of fundraising as in the United States. There's another example in the United States. There's Fox News. They tried to come to Canada, same type of situation. And we have something called the CRTC, Canadian Television and Radio Corporation. And I was one of the people who wrote in with comments. There's about 50,000 people who wrote in comments to CRTC about this because they were trying to get a rule change. The CRTC had a rule that said, you can't broadcast false news. It has to be true. And they were trying to change that rule to a less strict rule, which would have been it's okay to say false things as long as no one can prove anyone was hurt by it, or something like that. If you say something false and it has bad consequences that someone can prove, then that would be a problem, but otherwise it's okay. And I wrote in and I said, no, we should not have false news. You have to stick to the truth. And 50,000 other people did that. And I think that really stopped kind of that style of media from coming into Canada. There was also an interesting experiment that our Prime Minister, Pierre Trudeau, in the 1970s did. That's the father of our recent Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau. So we're not immune from nepotism in families and whatever, all that stuff either. But Pierre Trudeau, he would notice that a lot of people with money were lobbying the government, and so he's decided to give money to a lot of sort of community groups, and there was some women's groups, there was different types of things so that they would have the ability to also lobby the government. And that worked for a while until in the mid-1980s, the following government took all that funding away, and a lot of these groups struggled to fund themselves afterwards. Mm-hmm. But it was, I thought, an interesting experiment in trying to
control the effects.
Trying to mitigate the effects of lots of people having money for lobbying.
Yeah. So I mean, it's very interesting in the text itself that, he first, Madison first looks at, where these the what he sees as the human instinct for building factions even comes from. And you can remember Life of Brian, where the Judea Liberation Front and everybody's three different guys with different prepositions sitting around the same bench. And he says that you can't disable it, right? Because you would either have to remove the liberty of people, which you shouldn't do, or you would have to somehow brainwash everybody into the same opinion, which, I mean, we've seen in the disastrous history of the 20th century that usually comes with 60, 80 million people dead, because you can't really brainwash people. You can just get rid of them if you have enough horrors up your sleeve. And so the only way is to mitigate the effects. And I was thinking about just even software development and designing products. I know some of you might come from technology here. You can't change the user. So when you build the kind of UX journey in whatever product, what you're trying to do is make it as painless for them as possible to find things and do what they want to do, because humans cannot really be, you want citizens, right? You want to govern citizens, and for that you need autonomous individuals who can make choices. And so I found that very interesting. And to go back to the international examples, I'm Hungarian, and we just got rid of, after 16 years of a basically dictatorial, illiberal system, and the Orban regime entrenched itself even before starting to change a lot of rules that they then codified, and that the new Prime Minister Magyar basically hacked from the inside in a very interesting way that you guys should study. It's very, very interesting. Orban first exploited the two-thirds majorities rule that we have in the parliament, and it's a small country, right? So this is kind of proving Madison's point that a small community can really be captured much more easily. Because what happens is that in the Hungarian parliament, if you have a two-thirds majority, then you can technically pass any law without any opposition. So when, say, Fidesz decided 10 years ago that they would modify the Hungarian constitution for really no reason whatsoever than just the vibes, to include that gay marriage is outlawed, and that's in the constitution of the country now, that was something they drafted at 8 a.m. in the morning, and by noon it was passed. You would, out of politeness, listen to the two other people in the parliament who think you're an idiot, but they can't really do anything. And I always found that, for those of us who live for ideas and who live, amplifying, finding, connecting ideas and helping people to access them, this is such a tragedy of humanity. Because I want ideas to be battled out. That's why we want to live in republics, right? We don't want a king who's like, yeah, 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 I woke up with a constipation, you die. You want people to actually have to talk about stuff. And, America used to be a place where people switch sides sometimes. Like, oh, until then, the Democrats said good things, and now there's a Republican candidate with something good. And that used to be something that people could just do. And now, it's a kind of religious division. I want that time in a way to come back. I don't want, a color to be a defining thing for your whole life. Like now you committed to whatever, and it comes with 200 more beliefs that you don't even believe in, and that's like your life now. You should be like actually making a kind of marketplace decision between ideas and people and their, ethical buildup. And I feel like, as the Federalist Papers are developing in front of our eyes, we're kind of getting there where we need to like clear out some stuff to enable that competition. And very weirdly, and to me, this is like a kind of mind-boggling thing, that Madison argues that the more the territory, the more kind of this noise healthy noise you will have, which is really counterintuitive, especially for people who are like obsessed with the Roman empires, as we know every man is in the world, or, who, I don't know, come from China or Russia, from these big places where democracy failed. And then you have to kind of go very deeply into how the size and the success of decentralization correlate and what other factors they might be. If you have time, by the way, guys, watch on our YouTube. There was an internet textile with Tim Marshall, who wrote Prisoners of Geography. He's a wonderful geographical determinist. So he's the type of guy who will be like, India and China never wage wars because there is a mountain between them. And it's great. It's so reassuring. It's like reading a fairy tale. But he has some good points about America and why American decentralization works as well. Any more notes on tyranny? Just because these guys that wrote these papers really hated it. So just out of respect for them.
One thing I've noticed is, David, go ahead.
If multiple people want to talk, just raise your hand. Do you know the hand raise feature in the reactions? But I think, David, you were first?
Yeah, let him go first.
Okay.
Okay, I was just going to say that there's I think one of the things that this particular Federalist paper and others sort of created is a rhetoric of the public good. I've noticed in my own experience in government that if what you might call a faction, a point of view, one thing that's usually done is to dress up its factional arguments as a public good argument. You need to say that something is not in keeping with community standards. There's a variety of sort of rhetorical devices that factions use to put themselves on the page of the public good. So in a way, the success of some of the ideas in the Federalist Papers led to a template for making factional arguments. I think that there's an old saying, hypocrisy is the complement that vice pays to virtue. And I think this is an example of that you often have to look beneath the surface of arguments to see what's really going on, because successful arguments for public good have to be made in a certain way to make their case.
I love that. And
I think this is just a difficulty we have to get around with. Somehow.
Yeah, but I'm sure that for you, being an economist and coming from that tradition, public goods are revealed preferences, right? And they have to be challenged a little bit. And one good thing about open debate and societies that allow for that to happen through the free press and through wherever they gather as a government, sometimes people only really find out what's important for them when that thing is challenged. Right? Like a public good will be something where multiple different groups will find out that they have a revealed preference to actually put money somewhere and protect something together and take care of it. And oftentimes people don't really know. Like, I live very close to Central Park. We had Elizabeth Barlow Rogers on Interinteract, who in the 70s, solo as a middle-aged woman, basically rebuilt it. And first it had to deteriorate and become basically a dump that was extremely dangerous. And you look at photos from the 70s and it's heartbreaking. It looked like the third world. And that was already a prosperous America, and nobody cared, right? It was tragedy of the commons and governance failure in the city of New York. And this one woman just heard through her activism how important this was to people, and could raise the case and go to the board and be like, guys, I have it on good authority that people will support this, like taxpayers, donors, philanthropists will put in money because this is important. And this is not something that you really can do in a centrally planned, situation where one individual who is not an elected official, who's just a conservationist woman, can like go there and be like, hey guys, FYI, we don't have to live in a dump. And today we have Central Park, which I mean, you could probably like model the amount of like GDP add-on that causes to New York City through real estate and just like the value of the city and how many people want to live here and spend insane amounts of money on rent like myself. So absolutely, absolutely. Marcus.
Yeah, I wanted to like pull out the quote that I felt that Madison was like solving this tyranny of the majority and solving for democracy. He says the effect of the first difference is, on the one hand, to refine and enlarge the public views by passing them through the medium of a chosen body of citizens, whose wisdom may best discern the true interests of their country, and whose patriotism and love for justice will be least likely to sacrifice to temporary or partial considerations. And, well, yeah, that's a great idea, but
We should try this, right? It's so funny, by the way, how, this at first
this
surprising.
faction making.
This at first surprising
Yeah,
differentiation between republics and democracies comes up. And then eventually you understand that, oh, democracy is what he means by, today we would call it a direct democracy, like in, I don't know, ancient Athens or Native American tribes, where like
yeah.
people would actually go there in person and decide about their own lives, and everybody would vote, or everybody suffrage would vote, versus a republic where in the Madison's or like the Federalist system is like basically a technology, right? Where you don't have to get everybody together. It anticipates a huge population, but you have a kind of electoral system or some kind of representational system that everybody can trust and rely on. And it's so funny that to this day the two parties are Republicans and Democrats. And it's just kind of funny how that pops up such a long time ago. I really love it. Max.
Yeah, that's funny. I mean, just to respond to what you guys are talking about, I don't have the exact quote here, but there was a line that made me laugh where he says something like, of course, we all know that definitely all the best people are going to be the people who will be elected here, right? And but I think what I was really going to say, and not to harp on just the weaknesses, this fascinating paper, right? But maybe the thing where I was like, oh, where is that? Like, where does that come from? And I guess in theory, maybe it comes from this mechanism of getting the best people, but there's this sentence where he says, is a law proposed concerning private debts? It's a question to which the creditors are parties on one side and the debtors on the other. Justice ought to hold the balance between them. And it's sort of like, it assumes there's this public good style outcome called justice, but who knows, who is to say what that is, right? And it's sort of, it's the step that he doesn't take. I think I started thinking about that when Ellen was talking about campaign finance, because it's sort of the same idea. Oh, if you just removed money, then the good outcome would emerge. Which I'm inclined to agree, but at the same time, it's like that ideal outcome is what's missing.
I love, by the way, how in Hamilton, I think they make fun of Madison all the time, right? He's the butt of the jokes. For upholding monarchy, where you have like a random weird Habsburg who like cannot, stand up straight, and now he's like somehow leading the empire and marrying your daughter. You had to have a state religion, right? So there's a reason why, the Catholic Church was in this part of the world, I mean, the Western part of the world, and then in other areas, different state religions kind of co-opted the state system. Because to accept that ruler, you had to have the belief that somehow God wanted this person to be the ruler. And this was a time, when how many times you read about like Tudor families, et cetera, where they would have like 8 children, and the eldest son was this like beautiful, super popular, best hunter. All the girls are in love with him, and oh, sorry, at 17 he drops dead of like, I don't know, typhus, and now we have like the weird brother, and now he's the king. Great. So you had to believe in some kind of divine plan that your little human brain is like too dumb to understand to be able to live with that and trust the system that they will like somehow find a tutor for this idiot and like teach him to read, because sometimes that was not, guaranteed. Whereas in democracy, you can, claim, I mean, this is even Carl Schmitt accepts that, the Tocquevillian divinity of the people is sometimes a good idea. It's a big deal from him. You have to trust that actually people want some rational, good outcome for themselves. They want to be prosperous and happy, and they are relatively peaceful. These are all like highly debatable questions, by the way, but you kind of have to think this, and that their somehow inherent seeking of justice will lead them to at least try to vote for people who are reasonably expected to perform these values. I mean, you want to use the law of large numbers and think that some people will vote for the idiot, but the more people will vote for the good stuff because it will be somehow more obvious. And that's the logic of it. And, some people claim that, the American system is a civic religion, that you need an irrational belief in these qualities of people to be able to entrust them with decision making. But when you actually look at how constrained the system is, and we will look at all the checks and balances, you might question this deep trust invested in the people and how much we really, really trust them and their amazing elected officials to really kind of do the tasks of democracy. It's a very interesting kind of, as we say in Hungarian, trust in God, but lock your car. I think that should be on the dollar. That's how I think the system works. Vipul, you have your hand up.
Yeah, it's it's an interesting point on the presence of money in our system as a counterbalance to that, actually, because if it could actually be a good balance against the tyranny of the majority, or the belief that people with will always rise to the good decision, because if it's clearly not, and you can coalesce enough interest in your idea and channel it through money, because you assume the people who do get it can collect a bunch of money, then it can actually be put to use to override that tyranny of the majority. Just like I think your example on the Central Park person, Elizabeth, is a great example of that, right? And so maybe actually the presence of money in the system in the way it is actually a way to coalesce or catalyze good ideas versus bad, because a good idea should be funded well and should be channeled to the politicians who would advocate for it, right? I think that the whole crypto movement sort of realized that. Now you can argue whether that's good or bad, but it's just a tangible recent example. But it happens in climate and every place else. So it's in a way, it is a way to balance the problem of democracy.
And I love that point. And obviously the domination of capital in America creates a very different political system and a very different kind of, and even just comparing it to next door neighbor Canada, comparable in size and in governments type otherwise. I mean, we've seen some very interesting recent examples. I remember when AOC first went to DC, there was some very interesting conversation. I mean, she's kind of like my age, and you're like a millennial girl. She doesn't come from money. And she was like, I can't get a haircut in DC. Like, I can't go to a proper hairdresser because it's really expensive. And you start thinking like, well, actually, you have to be a little bit of a Nepo baby, even in America, which seems to be like so grassroots in other ways, or Mamdani, right? Like from a super wealthy family to be able to afford getting started. Because at the beginning, you will just be dropped into one of the most expensive cities in the world. You have to live in the central area, right? Because that's where you work. You have to like have good clothes and go in. And we forget that that's like not a given for everybody who has great, political ideas. So there is this weird filter. And the other thing about money is, yeah, I agree. And for instance, Trump is a great example of an outsider who just like raised enough capital to be a credible challenger. And it did work for him. I think one of the reasons why, so many Americans are suspicious of, oh, just like, let's have more revealed preferences and like a best and the brightest will be able to raise a lot of money and then outcompete the other guy is I don't think most people trust capital anymore, or I don't know if they ever did. We like to portray today as an extremely capital critical era where people hate billionaires and trillionaires even more. And we talk about capitalism like it was late stage, even though we have no idea. And maybe this is just the beginning. But we forget that, in the early 1900s, there were labor riots and unions and Goldman and Upton Sinclair and Chicago was on fire. So I don't know if this is really the most capital critical era in the history of America. But they're definitely like, I think what do you guys think about it? Like if there was a major think piece tomorrow in, I don't know, the New Yorker, like let everybody just like amass any kind of money they want because the best people will get the most money and they can be the best running at running for office. Would you guys be like, this is a great idea? Or would you be like, this needs to stop? How would you feel? How would you react? Maybe you would run for office. No, that would be your cue. You would be like, here's my bank account. Everybody, let's do a Kickstarter. DJ?
It's actually Danielle had a question.
Hi. Yeah, it's kind of interesting because Madison keeps talking about the public interest, right? And the idea that there are certain kinds of people, representatives who will be voted in, who have a better sense of the public interest rather than private passions or individual passions. But capitalism, I think, creates a particular kind of challenge to that binary. Capitalism is, or the capitalist interest is by definition like a particular kind of interest, particular industry, a particular entity. It's not the common good necessarily. Adam Smith, of course, tried to think that it could be the common good, that all of us pursuing our self-interest would achieve the common good in some sense, but it hasn't proven to be a particularly smooth system in that way. So I don't know how much Madison could have anticipated some of the problems that we deal with today because of the challenges posed by capitalism, whatever stage of capitalism we may be in, the very beginning or late or whatever it is. It's a challenge.
Although the one sentence I did highlight is he says, disputes are most often about the unequal distribution of property. I thought that was very interesting that he felt the need to call that out.
These are brilliant points, and actually one of the main things that you find when you start scratching the surface of what this paper is about is it kind of they are in the aftermath of a lot of like riots between creditors and people who owed tax. And they had this huge problem where they couldn't tax each other, even though they had huge debt, as one of the Eminem style rap battles in Hamilton might bring to mind. That was a huge problem. And I love this point, Danielle, about capitalism being kind of private interests. And to me, one thing that kept coming up as I was reading it, and I was so happy for David Ballard's point about it, like, one of the core senses of living in a democracy is that what a public interest is not expected to be obvious to everybody. Like if you live in a religious tyranny, right, then you absorb it from the Bible or the Quran or from other scriptures when you're a child, and it's like baked into you. Like if you grew up on the Talmud, you will have a very like fixed set of values, even though maybe the Talmud is not a good example because there's a lot of debate, obviously, even in the book. But like I want to live in a place where it's like not obvious and we get to talk about it. And I think one of the funny downsides of that is we've seen in the past years, like especially Trump Vol 2, what happens when we start talking about some of these foundations? Because suddenly you find out like, oh, actually a bunch of Americans want a king. Others think that, women should not attend college because then they will want to have less babies, and that's bad. And then you're like, yeah, did I want to really open this Pandora's box or not? But I guess when you have the good checks and balances in place, you should be able to do that for every generation. Jose?
I just wanted to make the point, similar to what you were just saying, Mrs. DJ, was that I think their success is in finding that they really understand human nature. I think that's why they're not talking about specific things. They're really talking such general things. I really do think they know human nature. That says the influence of factitious leaders may kindle a flame within their particular states. Relevant to today. A rage for paper money, check. An abolition of student debt, an abolition of debt, check. An equal division of property, check. For any other improper or wicked project, check. And so I'm really amazed and in awe of the text for being focused on human nature. And I think that is part of its power. Whether you agree or disagree with what happens, the text has a lot of power in that.
I love this. And I just checked that the next episode we have will be on the 14th of July. So it will be a French themed gathering then. And you're welcome to bring the artisanal food, by the way. I might be wearing a beret. I love this point. And, one thing that happens when you live in this kind of continual political tradition where you can kind of expect every cycle to be similar is that you do build up, for instance, political dynasties or systems where, the place where the seat of the government is an expensive, fancy metropolitan area where it takes some like cash to be able to like rent even a studio apartment and look presentable when you go and deliberate. And that in many, many, many industries, and not just the kind of reproducibility of political talent, but you see this in film, you see this in literature, you get kind of fancier and fancier people by the generation. Sometimes it drops back, like you have, in US history, you have like certain waves where, Marxist ideas come in, or the social revolutions of the 40s from the military come in. You have the 60s, the Camelot Revolution. You have it sometimes, but still there is like an upward, weird curve of elitism that is in politics. And for the Brit here, you might remember how they often charge Margaret Thatcher that she doesn't know how much a quart of milk costs, because by that time she hadn't been in a supermarket for 20 years. But I think in like American political classes, some people have never been to a supermarket. Like I'm pretty sure Ivanka Trump has never, however fantastically intelligent she is, and clearly a very competent person and mother, these people come from worlds that for the average person, it's kind of unimaginable. I think even for like an upper middle class American to, I sometimes interact with people like that through my work in technology, who really live like old-timey aristocrats with huge staffs and you start wondering, like, as we do wonder about technology and we think, oh, all our lives are saturated with technology, so many of our basic functions are being taken care of by these products. Do we want people who know real people to build these products for us? And I think it's the same for political classes. And what I love about these like rock stars, basically they had a lot of life experience. They fought in wars and they traveled and they had to build up themselves. And I think there is some humanizing element to it. And it always makes me reflect a little bit on the importance of exposing young, intelligent people to real human experiences, instead of like, incubating generations of Ivy League students who are, who don't drink, don't go out with other people, don't do jobs in the summer. They are just like piano class, ancient Greek, advanced math, bomb, Stanford, and then you go into a law office. Like, maybe some of the political discourse would be better if it had more people. You can think whatever you want about AOC, but it would be hard to argue that she doesn't have an idea about real people's real lives. I mean, her whole kind of platform is that she comes from a real place. And I find it I find it to be a weird reminder that the most elite documents that founded that kickstarted the source code of this country were created by people who definitely knew where to get milk, most likely, and have seen a wound and had a child and had just like normal human experiences happening to them. It's a little bit more resonating with other people, I think. Alexandra.
Yeah, I think one of the
Oh, wait,
things
David, because Alexandra has
distracting-
her hand up, and then I will go to you, okay? Sorry.
I didn't see
yeah.
it. I didn't see it. Sorry.
Yeah,
Go
yeah,
ahead.
no,
Sure.
just one second. Yeah, Alexandra, the
Fine.
floor is
I
yours.
think I really resonate with what you're saying about like the lack of human experiences that we kind of have. And I kind of want to take that in two routes, but like I think not only do we have a lack of human experience, but we're almost averse to it. Like it used to be honorable. I mean, death used to be a lot more normalized than it is today. And today we're so afraid of dying and we're quite egoistic. And we're afraid of aging, we're afraid of dying. And the idea of a wealthy person's child fighting in a war is just completely unthinkable. Versus when you think back to a lot of these kind of old, like the
Teddy Roosevelt's son,
yeah, exactly, the Teddy
like,
Roosevelts and like the intelligentsia of like the 1900s, they were all fighting. They were all in war. They were all seeing what life has to offer. And I think also like when you look
and the women
at
were like, church groups and women's groups and philanthropy, like nurses feeding people, orphanages. Like this was like, even in Hamilton, like Eliza, right? Like starts an orphanage. Like those were very real experiences.
yeah, and I think someone earlier also referenced like the political belief that's becoming increasingly common that women should not go to college because they, it'll result in them having less children. But like they're forgetting that these things actually mean something. That like childbirth used to be something that could result in death. They're forgetting that things actually carry weight. And I feel like we've kind of moved entirely into the world of symbols where there's no weight to anything. There's nothing these days that carries any weight at all. And I also want to take this in another direction as well, where this is completely anecdotal. I'm basing this in like zero historical, like very, very, very light historical understanding. So if anyone understands more than me, please feel free to interrupt. But I was speaking to someone who was born and raised in France the other day, and we were talking about the French Revolution as opposed to the American Revolution. And he was telling me about how in grade school it was really emphasized for them that the overthrow of the monarch. So in America, we learn about the French Revolution as the defeat of the upper class by the peasant class. We learn about let them eat cake. We learn about these things that are kind of like very rooted in like the poor rising up against the wealthy. And in reality, the way that they've learned about it in France is that, well, it's more complicated than that. You have a new wealthy class that's overthrowing the old wealthy class. You have the kind of industrial revolution creating a new wealthy class that overthrows the old wealthy class. And I'm sure that the same was true in the American Revolution. You have this kind of new industrial class that creates these jobs that's overthrowing the old monarch class.
Absolutely.
And I feel like we've kind of had such new money overthrowing old money up until there's borderline nothing to overthrow anymore.
Yeah. No, that's brilliant. You basically figured out what Peter Turchin is all about. And I really recommend his book because his whole new book, Peter Turchin. I don't know if you guys know this wonderful, wonderful historian and historical mathematician. Like he creates amazing models. He was on Interact. I was like so scared. He just came and I was hosting and I was like, oh my God, he's a total genius. And one of the things that he invented is the cryodynamics model, where he basically can predict upheavals in history because apparently they come obeying mathematical laws. It's kind of freaky. And the other idea that he has is the counter-elite revolution, and that you can actually model all these major social changes as counter-elite revolt. Like one new elite, as you figured it out, revolts against the old elite. And if you look at the French Revolution, I very, very much recommend Hilary Mantel's beautiful book, A Place of Greater Safety. It's a super saucy novel that is also 100% historically accurate, and you learn a lot about the French Revolution from it. These were the students. So like Robespierre, Dalton, they all went to the same school. In the 1917, 1918 Leninist upheaval in Russia was also students. So you create 1848 Habsburg revolutions were also students. So you create a new type of urban congregation of wannabe elites who are blocked by the old system. And if it's the weather is nice enough and there are enough horny young men, then they might do a revolution. And then you don't know what, if it's raining, no. It's very interesting to me. But if it's sunny, that's why all of these are in the summer, and I'm serious. It's always spring or summer. That's very true. And I love it. I know Shobha, you want to reflect on it, and I would love to give you the floor. I love this. I love this note, Alexandra, about nothing carrying weight. And I recommend Charles Tainter's system of social collapse. I'm actually going to share a text here because he talks about this kind of nihilism because people's real lives do contain weight, right? Like if you are buying a house or having a baby or going to school and have student loan or just like trying to make a life for yourself, you will have to deal with very weighty things. It's that it's not reflected in the political narrative, right? So what happens when people become nihilistic is that you have problems and they are talking about other problems. And now you're like, okay, so I have these problems and I'm paying taxes, but they're using the taxes to solve a problem I don't even have, and nobody cares about the stuff I do have. And first, people try the democratically available things, like they try to like first talk to their group chat, and then they talk to their whatever, and then they try to like call their congressperson. And if nobody reacts, eventually you become nihilistic or you do a revolution. Like these are the two ways, and both clear the way for a counter elite who can come in and say, we are counter, which means that we understand that you want the opposite of these guys. And we are elite, which means we have enough power that we can do something about it. So give us money, right? Because you're not going to give money to somebody or attention or your heart that is ineffectual. But if somebody's like elite enough, so there's an interesting kind of matrix. I know we're a little bit over time. I just want to ensure that Shobha, you gotta go. And then David, you will be the closing section. I mean, if you want to get the mic, Shobha, obviously I don't want to throw it at you.
Yeah, no worries. I think it's just really interesting because I mean, it's something I've been thinking a lot about, like with my own career. Like I work in healthcare, but I work on like maybe the more abstracted side. So I think it was Alexa, someone said something about like we think in abstractions and symbols. And I mean, it was something I was thinking about today, right? Like how much of our, even just like at least my professional life is like abstractions and symbols and all of these things that are so like distant and divorced from like the actual humans on the other side. And in my case, like the patients. And yeah, I think also to your point just now, Anna, like I was canvassing over the weekend for a candidate, and so many people that I talked to on the street were just saying like, I don't really believe in voting. Like it was pretty heartbreaking, honestly. Um, but I think it's probably a symptom of like everything you just said maybe going on in our country. And I don't know. Something I've been thinking about is how we got there. How do you fix that when it's like gotten to this stage? Because I think it was like probably about 50% of the people I was talking to were like, who could vote were like, I don't really believe in doing it. Or the primary doesn't matter, or like whatever.
What a failure of the system and education and the whole the communication systems. Like, that's terrible. And you
Yeah.
know, like how they say that no opportunity is lost, someone else will take it. Like every time people become nihilistic and they are not active, somebody else will come. I was invited to this like female founder thing like a couple of years ago in New York City, and I was sitting on this rooftop, these beautiful women, you know, super talented, super highly educated, really the creme de la creme of the country. And we were sitting around and talking about stuff like 25, 30 women. And I was thinking like, oh my God, you know, in the 60s, like or like you go back a couple of decades, all of these women would have been politically active in some ways. They would have at least been a donor to somebody. They would have attended a whatever convention. They would have organized locally. Like they would have had a political life. And we completely lost the political life, right? Like you used to have this portfolio in your life that you have, you know, a family life, a professional life, maybe a religious life, and you had a political life. And that was a big deal because you kind of earned it, you won it. Like women chained themselves to like fences to get the political life. And that it's such a wide spectrum. Like you can run for office or you can just like canvas, like do some smaller thing that still enables you to participate in this big project. And it's a completely non-sexy thing for our generation in some sense. And maybe this is why, because people stopped participating because that's what people told them. Like, there was no audience. And it becomes this like self-reinforcing thing that is just so hard to get out of unless, you know, we all do our part. Thank you so much for doing it. That's awesome. Go you. David, you are our closing coda. Thank you for your patience. And then I will see you guys on the 14th of July. David, the floor is yours.
Thank you, everyone. I was going to make a similar point to the point that Anna and Alexandra made, but I was going to phrase it in terms of precarity. You know, a lot of the precarity has gone out of life compared to, say, the time that Madison and the Federalist folks were writing, especially in the health side, but also economically. You know, I think we figured out how to keep currency stable. You know, in those days, you could lose all your wealth very quickly in a way that's really less true now. And in fact, there's some discussion of that in the recent Ken Burns series on the American Revolution, which is on PBS now. And in fact, one of his themes is these sort of competing elites, the British and the American elites in the colonies that Alexandra was alluding to. You know, so that's a theme that he picks up.
I love it. And Alexandra figured it out. I love it. This is so cool. This is why we need like people just like thinking about stuff, because you don't have to be Peter Turchin, major historian. You can just be a logical person with a curiosity. And, you know, I hate that we divide people into like professionally thinking about stuff and just kind of being the victims. No. Like you can participate. Just like think, write, share, come to salons. It's all there in your head.
Yeah, often the professional ones just articulate what many people have been thinking in a clear way.
Beautiful session, guys. Done. I love it. Thank you so much for being here and for staying a little bit longer. I will see you on the 14th of July. We will start going more deeply into the checks and balances, which is a very, very, very interesting question. And kind of heads up, I really want to talk about the media angle as well, which, you know, is maybe the fourth pillar there. Just because I think that some very, very interesting things are going on in the media in America. I think in competing and completely like contradictory ways, centralization and decentralization at the same time, old media gaining a new kind of boost and also simultaneously being dead. And I think those very complex things are the best to discuss. So we will look a little bit at that as well, and all stories welcome. Are we happy with the video going online? We are, right? All right, guys, this was amazing. Go you, and I will see you soon. Bye, good night.